Darren, there is so much to go over, so much happening this week. What are we expecting the Prime Minister to be saying behind that door?
Well, it's always quite extraordinary, isn't it, Tom, as you well know, that you think the big issues this week, we've got, strike action going ahead by teachers now just next month, in a couple of weeks' time. We know nurses are on strike again tomorrow. You think, OK, they may well be talking about strikes, or they could be talking about, as you say, the changes to the online harms bill, or they may be looking at this potential constitutional crisis, if you like, between Westminster and Holyrood over that evoking, if you like, of Section 35 of the Scottish Act. And yet, actually, they tend to talk about something completely that's not in the news. And we'll have to wait and see. We get the readout, don't we, from Cabinet when the meeting has happened. And as I say, it is all for naught on the big issues of the day. It could be on the Ukraine war, it could be on the state of the British economy, it could be on a whole range of different issues. So frankly, even though the newspaper headlines, as you say, are focusing on those other big issues, actually Cabinet, perhaps maybe unsurprisingly sometimes, tends to focus on other things too.
Yes, it's interesting. I think at the last Cabinet readout we received, they were going on and on about the King's coronation, which I'm sure will be a lovely big event for the whole country, but it doesn't seem like it's particularly should be at the top of the agenda for politicians today. Let's talk about strikes first of all, because last night Conservative MPs, for once, seemed pretty united. This seems like it's the only big piece of legislation that hasn't seen sort of countervailing amendments coming from within the Conservative Party.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned it, didn't you, that Rishi Sunak's not yet been defeated in Parliament, but that's because actually on a whole raft of legislation he's had to cave in to his backbenchers so far in order to see off any potential defeat. But you're right also in saying that last night MPs from both parties actually very united behind the whip, if you like, with the Conservative Party passing that bill, 309 votes to 249 in the Commons, in order to bring in these minimum levels of service in some of the key industries in terms of health and in terms of the railways, to try and prevent effectively strike action from happening in the future that will cause major disruption. Now, the big point we should make about all of this is that this is only the start of the legislative process. It will need to go through the House of Lords and then back into the Commons and get royal assent. And while that is likely, I suspect the Lords will try and hold it up a little bit. It is not going to have an impact on any of these strikes that we're seeing in the days, weeks and months to come. So yes, the Conservative Party is united on this. As you say, it seems to hold back to a couple of decades ago, but that's where we are today, effectively in a winter of discontent. But in the immediate term, it's not going to solve any of the problems that the government are currently facing.
Now, finally, the government has made a pretty big decision this week, and that is to enact Section 35 of the Scotland Act, striking down legislation passed by the Scottish Parliament for the first time in the history of devolution. This is a big, big step.
Really, really big step. Now, the government's argument in all this, Tom, is that they are doing this because of the law. They're not doing this because they necessarily disagree with the Act, though it must be clear that they do. But they feel that this, the Gender Recognition Act in Scotland cuts across the Equalities Act here in the rest of the UK, and that in the end, they have to protect UK law because it applies to the whole of the United Kingdom. And that is why Alistair Jack has made this decision. We're going to hear from him in the Commons later on. Now, Nicola Sturgeon faces two kind of challenges here, or two potential possibilities. Either she goes back to the Scottish Parliament and she looks at amending this legislation, and the UK government say they are open to that as long as it fits in with the current Equalities Act. So that's a potential out for Nicola Sturgeon. Or she goes down the legal route and tries to challenge the government's decision in the courts. Now, it looks like she's going to do the latter, and in doing so, of course, she will bang the drum saying that it is an outrage, as she did last night, a full-frontal attack, she branded it, on the Scottish Parliament, that it is having one of its laws essentially rejected by politicians down here in London. However, as I say, the government are pretty clear that they think they've got a strong legal case in all of this, and they are trying to encourage the Scottish government essentially just to amend the legislation and make it work that way. And I think the other big kind of question here for Scotland, and in particularly for the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon is where public opinion lies on all of this. Where is the Scottish people in all of this? Are they opposed, as opinion polls seem to suggest, to the legislation in Scotland itself? And in essence, will it actually be that big a deal, if you like? Or actually, will they be more outraged that Westminster has taken this action, and will the SNP be able to exploit that kind of argument that they're making, that the Scottish Parliament is being undermined by politicians here at Westminster? Essentially, will it stoke Scottish nationalism? So there's lots of different threads to all of this. It's quite difficult to work out. We say it's a constitutional crisis. It's clearly a big move. It's unprecedented. It's not happened since devolution. But you know what? Actually, the public in Scotland might not be as concerned about all of this as the SNP would like us to believe. But it also depends on how the government react to all of this here at Westminster. And indeed, of course, if it does go down the legal route, to what the courts say, because that, in the end, will actually be decisive and pretty crucial, I would argue.